All right. Hello, everyone. Today is December 4th, 2024. This is the Kubernetes Steering Committee meeting. This is the public meeting that will be recorded and available on YouTube. So please be mindful of what you say and do. Please be sure to adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which kind of amounts to just be generally awesome people. We've got just a few announcements, I think, regarding elections and then we're going to dig into topic with the Security Response Committee. So we've got Rita and Joel here. Um, Before that, does anyone want to say hi, introduce themselves? I think we kind of know who everyone is, but just in case. All right, cool. All right. So first announcement on elections are open. So the Code of Conduct Committee nomination period has begun. We opened that as of the start of this week. And we've so just to explain to people what's going on, because I think our out of all of our documentation reflects the current state of affairs. We had some conversations in the past regarding uh, kind of removing the conflict of interest between the elections with steering committee and code of conduct committee. So those elections in the past have been pretty close together and can cause kind of an imbalance in committees if there are sitting code of conduct members or newly elected code of conduct members that then decide to run for steering, right? So what we've done is kind of swap the elections around. We've moved the next code of conduct election. The election period will be happening in early February in 2025. So the nomination period is open right now, and it's a pretty wide window from December 2nd to just about the end of January. So I think it's January 31st. And we'll be sending reminders throughout. Understand that there are holidays coming up, so people may miss some of these reminders, but we're keeping the window pretty wide to give as much of an opportunity as possible for some of these submissions. So if you're interested, if you're listening to this, if you're either on the call or listening to this right now and interested in the Code of Conduct Committee, you can check out the notes, which I will share. Hold on. You can check out the notes. They're both the dev notification as well as the nomination form that's available in the notes. And if you do not have access to the note doc, most folks should, I'm just going to drop a link to that in the chat. Cool. Any questions on Code of Conduct Committee? All right. Also, while we're here, can I grab a note taker? Okay, Mache, thank you. Thank you for signing up for that. Um, Now, the next election, Mache, you sent out the email. Do you want to speak briefly about the dev seat for the
Sure.
GB?
So, we, as being one of the biggest project in the CNCF, we have the privilege of nominating a person for the governing board in CNCF. That's the person basically that is representing our interest, our as in Kubernetes project interest, to make sure that they are properly handled and are properly prioritized. Uh, it's a seat that is being taken from past steering members. So I'm aware that you haven't seen any announcements or anything in public. The email will send out to all the current and past steering members. Because as it stands today, those are the eligible people who can nominate themselves. We will be holding the voting somewhere early January, and we'll be announcing who is the governing board person. Currently, the position is being held by Christopher Blecker for the past 2 years, and his term is about to end. If you have any questions, feel free to either reach out to me on Slack or just ask over here.
Thank you, Mache, and thank you, Christoph, for your service over the past 2 years. not just on even prior to that, your service on steering and your service to the community on the CNCF governing board. Um, I think there is an open question around eligibility in future. Just want to raise that publicly as well, that the steering committee will be discussing if we want to potentially expand the eligibility for future GB elections. So stay tuned for issues and discussion around that. All right. Any questions, comments, concerns on that one? All right. So I know that this is at the end of the agenda, but I want to get this one out of the way since I think we're about to get into a pretty meaty discussion, which is why the agenda is a bit sparse. Can we have a bosun for January? Is anyone interested?
I might be out, but if no one will do it.
I'm just trying to
I
figure out what's
would,
the date for.
yeah, I was looking at that myself and I couldn't just find it in my calendar. So if you have a
Is
date
that,
for,
yeah.
Let's see. Hold on.
Oh, it's the first.
Ooh, okay. Well,
That's not gonna happen.
well, so I think
That's
what we'll go back and do is clean up the steering committee meeting dates for January, and then we'll choose a bosun offline. How about that?
yeah, definitely the
Cool.
first is that would be hard.
Yeah, I imagine most of us will be out of office at that point. So, um, cool. All right. Uh, Rita, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, steering committee, for adding this to the agenda. And I believe this came out of a lot of the hallway discussions, as well as the contributor summit. Um, let's start with the first proposal, which is basically transitioning the current in-scope model to an opt-in model to ensure that the Kubernetes Security Response Committee um, can scale as a project, as a organization is scaling, to ensure we have the best resources and you leverage our time on the most critical projects slash features, right? Um, I don't know if everyone has had time to take a look at the document. If not, do we feel like maybe a few minutes to read through the doc might make sense? What do y'all think?
Can you roughly summarize the major points?
Sure,
That
happy
will be
to.
also helpful for the recording, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and maybe what we can do is start from what specifically we want to propose, and then we can kind of talk through the explicit
Okay.
points there. Yeah,
Yeah, thanks. And whoever is sharing, if you don't mind scrolling as I talk through this, that would be beautiful.
I gotcha.
Um, yeah, so the TLDR is the SRC is proposing a opt-in model from the current inclusive model. Currently, basically, it's everything under the Kubernetes, basically all the projects within the Kubernetes project are considered included in the SRC scope. That obviously impacts the way we triage issues, how reporters report them, as well as how the bounties are being used, right? So the proposal here is explicitly opt-in from SIG owners who will work with the sub-project owners by meeting production readiness and security contact criteria. This change will ensure a more focused and sustainable approach to address the ongoing security issues that we are seeing to ensure that we can meet the security standards of the project. That's the TLDR. And if you go to the current scope and challenges section, as you can see, as of November 2024, these are all the repos under these GitHub orgs. Obviously, some we are explicitly calling out as in scope, some we called out as out of scope. But the way it is written, currently it explicitly includes all projects within the Kubernetes and GitHub Kubernetes dash whatever or GitHub orgs are actually in scope by default, right? As we all know, a lot of these projects may be at a point in time. Some of these might be experimental. So the challenges, of course, are with 300 plus repos in these Kubernetes organizations, it becomes a scalability issue. So we believe that in order to address the security vulnerabilities across these projects, we need to come up with a better way to opt in and make sure that the SIG owners and project owners actually think that they are ready to be included in the SRC umbrella, right? And obviously, this also addresses a sustainability issue in terms of our budget for bounty. We actually ran out of budget for bounty in 2024 due to a lot of payouts for some of these alpha things. And it, of course, it's hard for us to also retrofit and tell the reporters like, hey, thanks for reporting this, but actually, you know, these are experimental and maybe not so critical, right? So I think a better scoping of what is under the SRC umbrella is, again, better for consumers of these projects as well as reporters who are trying to maybe best utilize their time to discover the most critical bugs. And also, as I mentioned earlier, because we don't have these type of signals, it actually, as a project organization, we actually lack some of these product readiness assurance. I know Kubernetes project does a good job of graduating features, but not all projects are the same. Many projects may not actually meet the production readiness criteria. Some were abandoned, some became stale, leading to, again, inefficiency in vulnerability triage and prioritization. And they all live under Kubernetes or Kubernetes 6 GitHub organization. I think users, when they look at that, they may mistakenly assume that these are production ready because they're, you know, under the Kubernetes umbrella and may have been blessed by the Kubernetes maintainers, especially because some of these are actually sub-projects under a SIG, right? Going down the list of challenges, if you could scroll down. Again, also, sometimes it's unclear what the responsibilities are. Again, because it's not opt-in, maybe certain projects are added to these GitHub organizations, but the maintainers weren't actually aware, hey, they're actually part of the SRC umbrella, and therefore they need to have people that can effectively triage and remediate these security vulnerabilities. Inconsistent security context. Many projects don't really have up-to-date security contacts, and it became really hard for SRC to even find the right people.
So-
I'm going to stop real
Yep.
quick.
Yeah, Ben has a hand up. I just want to see
Okay,
if,
sorry, I didn't see
yeah,
it. Yeah.
no, I'm tracking. Don't worry about it.
So I think a lot of this makes sense. One problem that I think I see is I think the angle on the like production readiness certification, one problem is that that's really something that we would need to talk to SIGArch about. The other thing I think is that I don't think that quite captures what you need. So as an example, any of the infrastructure that we're using to run the project itself, we probably really care about if that gets a vulnerability, even if it's still experimental, if it, you know, if it has like the account that has org admin over the project, like we still really want people to report issues for that sort of thing. I think I would split out the prod readiness badge. I think that's a pretty big can of worms that doesn't necessarily like solve the problem here, and focus more on the designating projects that have um security opt-in. Uh I think you should also think a little bit more about what happens if basically every project says, okay, we'll use alpha, beta, GA for our features, we're opting in. And now like the list hasn't shrunk. It might be some other criteria talking about you know, what things would be in scope. Because I said there's, you know, there's things that we expect end users to run, but I think we also in the past we've had reports about, like, for example, our CI and whether or not we really expect other people to run those tools. It kind of matters if they're vulnerable. um I think maybe we should iterate on that a little bit. um I also had a couple other comments. Like, I think that if we have like some kind of opt-in badge, it seems like that should probably go in the like security.md for more visibility. Um, I think that overall this makes sense. I kind of think that we should probably split out this like prod readiness certification thing. I think we would probably spend a while nailing that down, and I think that even some things that wouldn't have it, we'd still want to cover if they're like, we're not trying to advertise the rest of the world use them, but like we're using them.
Joel?
Yeah, so I think the idea with the production readiness thing it isn't necessarily to exclude things that we consider important. So, for example, in our using the example you gave of some of the tooling we use and so forth, we already have explicit call outs to what we call supply chain types of infrastructure. And so we already have spots where we designate like what things are in scope at which tier for those. And I don't think that would be changing. So I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, whether we decide to use a production readiness criterion or not as the you know, as what we call the opt-in for the projects, we can still have other things that are explicitly in scope uh, for our program. Um, and then if everybody opts in, I don't know that we considered that, but I don't see it necessarily as a problem. That is the issues we had this year would largely have been solved by even if everybody had opted in, as long as they had designated beta features. One of our biggest bounty or alpha features, one of our biggest bounties this year was a member of the committee described it as a side project of a side project. It would have been something that they would have designated alpha. We wouldn't have had to pay that bounty based on our current guidelines. Um, and then finally about the badge, we want the badge. The idea with the badge is to make it like an incentive for people, and so I don't think people go and click on the security contact. So the idea is that you display it proudly on your main README, and maybe it could be a link that goes to the security contacts with more info, or maybe it's displayed in both places. But uh, having it there in your main README that people arrive at when they look at your project, and have it be like a source of pride for your sub project. That's the idea behind it. And that's
So
what I thought in the main.
yeah, but I mean, now you're actually creating an incentive for people to get opted into being in it. I don't think that we want that, and I think if the project comes up with a formal production ready standard, that's a much bigger can of worms. I think that the key part that you need here is the designating that projects that are going to be under like SRC's bug bounty need to be delineating things that are alpha within the project. Is an important part. And whether if it's the whole project, then then you don't include it. But I think that the I think that if we create a process where people are going to slap a production readiness badge on it, then that's actually going to incentivize putting that badge on everything, because it will look good, like you said. But we don't actually want that. We want you to document, is this something that SRC should be doing bug bounties for? And are there features that should be out of scope because they're experimental off by default? And that's even like the alpha beta GA thing. So for example, this also doesn't mention like the on by defaultness or that kind of thing. That's not uniform across the project. I think we should drill down more into the expectations around the mark, like designating features not being available and the like opt-in part. I think it will also be confusing if almost every project that is in scope has a prod ready badge, but then we have some infra bits that like don't have that badge.
Yeah, so I don't, sorry, I apologize. I don't know how to raise my hand, but in this view, but I think I agree with, and I mean, this is some of the interesting discussions that we kind of ran into with KEPS and the enhancement subproject about what is in tree and what is out of tree, and the level of like thoroughness that would be required for like reporting onto a KEP, or reporting in about a KEP within the context of the release cycle. If something is out of tree, then we kind of don't necessarily expect that. I think we have representatives from a few SIGs here that are, are infra focused, are release focused, release engineering focused, where some of these categorizations might not make the most sense. I do worry about classifying something as production ready. I think with some of the same points that Ben made, but also kind of, the what does that mean for that group? What does that mean for SRC? Are we saying that production ready is also means that it's in scope for SRC, or that it is out of scope for SRC, and people who are responsible for that project are going to hold it to some standard, right? The reason I wanted to initially raise my hand was uh, if someone says that they are opting into this process, um, or they're planning to handle security, reports kind of out of band from SRC. Do we have are we going to be providing them some modicum of training to be able to effectively do that? I think we have lots of maintainers on the project that are familiar with like responsible disclosure and kind of carrying things through a security release process. But we have lots of people who are not. So how can we work to fill that gap as well? I see hands up from Rita and Mache.
Rita was first.
Rita, go for it.
Yeah, first I wanna I plus one on the production readiness. I think when we added that, it was more of a way to further help the teams, help the maintainers understand what it means to opt in, actually, and help them provide a way to signal, hey, these are things that should be considered for bounty, or this is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So as I'm listening to you, Ben, I think perhaps what we want to come up with is when the maintainers opt in, they should actually document how their features should be considered for different tiers, like the way we have defined for Kubernetes, right? I linked the HackerOne thing in the chat. So this again helps SRC figure out, depending on the maturity level of certain features in your project, this is how we should actually respond to the report and actually the actual payout, right? And I think having something like that documented, one, helps the maintainers think about what it means to opt in, and two, again, it's also a way to communicate proactively with reporters, so that they are not surprised, right? This is most of the time when we explain the payout, sometimes, not most of the time, but sometimes it's a surprise, right?
Would it make sense to have them like write a document that goes in their docs or something that outlines the project specific details of like what would be considered in and out of scope, and have SRC assigned as the approvers to changes to that as like a prereq for the process, but also like ongoing any future PRs have to be approved by. Like we can set no, we can create, if we put it in, if we tell them to like put it in a directory or something, we can put like no parent owners and say only SRC can approve changes to this piece of documentation. Um, here's where you write that, and then part of the opt-in is you have to have an approved explanation for that project of, these are experimental things, something like that.
Yeah, I want to make it easy so there's less like human manual things as much as possible. Like maybe something again, just to get things started is if you, the maintainer, opt in, just give us like a short snippet of what do you consider as tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and we'll put it in the same link, right? When you opt in, this is basically what we're telling the world, right? And it doesn't have to be like too complicated. And if those things change, like say you added a new feature or whatever, that tier changes, work with the SRC and we get that updated. That way it ensures it's a conversation and an agreement in some sense, right? And to your earlier question, like what if they all opt in? I think the opt-in thing is not like, oh, just because you say you're opt-in doesn't mean you're automatically opt-in, right? Like there has to be some process in which SRC says, okay, have you met these requirements? And I think that's missing today. And so if you are if you raise your hand and say I want to opt in, and the project has met all these requirements, and you have security contacts who's willing to work with us, I mean that would be great, and that's exactly what we want out of these new processes.
You
That
also
all
have to have
makes
SIG
sense to me.
approval to opt in.
What's that?
Sorry.
You also have to have SIG approval to opt in under our proposal, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me. I think I would drop the like incentive thing. I think there's a pretty substantial incentive in having SRC fielding security reports, and that that should probably be enough. And we would probably focus more on like what are the criteria and what is the opt-in process. That's my recommendation.
I'm pretty sure that basically a lot has been said already, but the production readiness bit is just confusing to a lot of people. I would try to stay away from reusing that term, because a lot of people from between all of us will be seeing this production readiness. You're calling it production readiness certification. A lot of people will confuse this with the SIG-Arch production readiness. So I would probably say I would definitely try to use different term for that. And it seems like the tiers where everyone are basically are overlooked by SRC in a way that, yes, you need to have people responsible within the repos. And I believe we already have some security contacts. Ideally, each repo should have people from within, like that are closest to the code, that the SRC should be or could be able to reach out to. And then on top of that, only those that opt in will be additionally, after verification by the SRC, will be eligible for the bug bounties. Maybe that will be the only one where we would have to have SRC explicitly review the whatever requirements you're going to put in place to make sure that, oh, if you're on HackerOne mentioned, and we would have to have an explicit list of these are eligible for the actual bounties, and the rest, yes, we still want to accept those requests, but we're just not gonna pay for them because that's not a critical piece of the puzzle for us. So
Antonio?
Yeah, I don't see that we should enter into the production readiness topic. It's not meant. I don't know why we are conflating it. And the problem is that it's easy to weaponize this and game this production readiness thing. I know this because one project in Network was the target of this. So I really want to focus as we have the problem of security, solve a problem of the security, and then if we need to talk about the other specific problems with archiving projects and have this discussion in a separate track. If
Yeah,
you
so I
don't,
would say, yeah, so just to read out what Rita mentioned in the chat. What I'm hearing is that we should change production readiness certification to opt-in certification. Um, yeah, I agree. We can probably steer away from the conversation around production readiness because this is, and I think an accidental conflation, right? So yeah, I think we need to change the language. I think we're roughly in agreement that this is an opt-in for review by the SRC in scope for bug bounty, et cetera. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. All right, Rita, do you want to continue?
Yes, thank you for the feedback, and I'll bring this back to SRC and we'll update this, and we can come back later and continue the conversation. Thank you for the feedback. And then should we go to the next document?
Sounds good.
Okay, so TLDR for this proposal is due to the ongoing volume of security reports, we're proposing to recommend increasing the number of members from 9 to 11. We currently have 8 people, and we would also like to make sure that 2 of the members, again, regardless if we change from 9 to 11 or not, but we would like to introduce a specialization where, 1 or 2 of the members will actually focus exclusively on maintaining the test infrastructure to support testing of the embargoed vulnerability fixes in the private Kubernetes repository. And these folks would focus primarily on the infrastructure side and are not participating in the on-call rotation. And they will play a critical role in making sure that the fixes are properly tested. That's the TLDR. And we can kind of go to the challenges real quick. Capacity constraints. This is why we are proposing increasing from 9 to 11 to handle incoming reports in a timely manner. And allowing us to have enough people to also support the infrastructure side of things. And the infrastructure maintenance gap, as many of you are aware, there were prior for test infrastructure for the private Kubernetes repo. However, due to I guess just a lot of different things that the SRCs were not able to basically keep the infrastructure up to date, and therefore it became stale to the point where currently we do not have CI set up for the private embargo fix, and we think this is a huge risk to the project. And we've had a few instances where the embargo fixes were sent out, and then people basically came back and said this this fix broke something or didn't have enough coverage, etc. So this is why we are proposing this change.
And so maybe just for a second, and Antonio, I see your hand. And I apologize again. I have no idea how to raise my hand with this view. Just for I think background, maybe combined across myself and Ben, we can help elucidate some of the Sasha too. So there was a generation script, or there are a series of scripts that do generation for CI jobs within Kubernetes test infra. This is kind of just background for people who are listening to the call later. And in the past, it was able to basically generate all the CI jobs that included CI jobs for things in Kubernetes, the Kubernetes security org, which is where the SRC handles private fixes. Um, I think one is a matter of infrastructure cost. It was a matter of the people who were able to see and action on changes to the infra or changes to settings within the Kubernetes security org that were not necessarily supposed to have access to this. So I think part of what this proposal is discussing is designating people who are in the know enough about everything that's going on. So for example, within kind of across SIG release and SRC, there's a security release team, right? So members of the release managers group, as well as the SRC, help coordinate the timing and release of some of these fixes to the upstream branches. Apologies, I see Antonio, your hand is no longer up. I don't know if you still wanted to say something, but Ben, you've also got your hand up.
I also commented. I just wanted to ask if this is because it's a regulation or the way that it's structured or not, because
Yeah. I think we didn't get enough time at KubeCon to like dig into like what happened here. So things have changed quite a bit since then. One of the things that was different was the CI, the community was not actually running the instances. The CI was running inside Google. We didn't, like, the early versions of this predated SigKate's infra and the credits donation and stuff. So we had a very awkward problem where the group of people that have access to the CI and the group of people that are supposed to have access to the security patches are different. So there was a lot of back and forth on whether or not people running the CI would like maintain access to the private org. And it's really hard to debug infrastructure when you can't see the infrastructure it's interacting with. So that kind of went back and forth and made things confusing. It was very painful for contributors because anytime you wanted to touch any of the CI around Kubernetes, you also had to run this generator thing to like try to copy paste all of the jobs to run against the other repo. And so like we know we can make something like that work, but we also know it's not going to catch everything. Like, yeah, it'll catch the things that run in pre-submit, but the model for testing Kubernetes is we have lots of things that are too expensive that we don't run in pre-submit. Those jobs are only written to be things that run periodically against merge code. And we don't have enough capacity to do things like just duplicating all of that again to run periodically against another repo. So like there's a cost issue here. I think those all need digging into, and I think those at this point would be owned pretty clearly by SigKate's infra. I think that like we have a group that runs sensitive infrastructure now. Like the part of the model is the CNCF has the keys to all of our accounts, and then the leads of SigKate's infra have access to those, and that includes like all of our GitHub orgs and everything transitively. That's just accepted, and that's part of our like, well, we don't want to wind up in a place where everybody moved on and no one has access. So it's not just the leads of SigKate's infra, it's also very explicitly there are a couple people at the CNCF that have access to all the like infra accounts and things. We could probably have that group work on some of this, but I think the understanding like what we actually expect to catch here, because if it's things like unit tests breaking or verify lints, I really think we should be able to catch that even like locally or something. But for something like 5,000 node scale test breaking, I don't actually know if we currently would feel really comfortable running that again against another repo. So what we saw was that repo was not very active, and then basically all the tooling wasn't really built to handle private patches. So like one of the problems we have right now is that the CI infrastructure, we're trying to get active maintainers for it again, private or otherwise, and it's built to be running public CI. So I think, you know, even if you have some specialized separate role that's supposed to do this, it doesn't fix that. I mean, what we really need is we need people that own the tooling, that are maintaining it to begin with, and then when that's fixed, we can have a discussion about, okay, we need to have functionality to have like private CI results. That is something we don't do for any of the other stuff we're hosting. And with like Kate's info about the cost and like how we manage it. And that if we did this today, I think that we, you know, the people that have access to like the CI or Kate's info just would have access. So we wouldn't, I don't think we'd have that problem this time. I don't see us trying to like create things where only some Googlers on SRC have access, but like not the CI team or something like that. So I think that's pretty different. But some of the other problems, like how do you actually make sure you can copy paste the job over between repos, and does that even make sense, remain? And like we should probably still have that conversation. But that's probably a discussion like in SIG testing, in SIG Kate's infra, and I don't think we've done that properly yet.
Rita?
Yeah, like I just want to mention, even though it's not documented in here, I mean, we had many discussions in SRC about this problem and how to solve it. And, you know, obviously this would not be possible without working with SIG Kate's infra, right? So, and SIG testing. So that's for sure. I think it was more about who is going to own this long term going forward, and making sure that there is someone or few people who are going to drive these changes for this particular use case. And the thought was that Kate's infra team should be consulted and obviously partner here, but may not have enough bandwidth to support something like this for the private fixes. And back to Ben's earlier point, and Antonio, your question on, you know, why is this like specific to SRC? Well, part of the reason is the private fixes, not everyone have access to that, right? So the thought was, since the SRCs already have access to the private fixes, it makes sense for the people there to actually maintain and make sure that the jobs are passing, right? Go
I
ahead.
hear that, but I don't think that we, like with my Kate's infra hat on, I don't think we want to enter into a world where we have some infrastructure that like the infra leads even can't see. Like everything, we've made a really big point around transparency. We do have like, you know, here are some logs that only certain people can access or something, but that still rolls up to like the CNCF and the leads. We're not like hiding anything from them. Um, uh,
So are
yeah.
you proposing maybe part of SIG Kate's infra would have access to that private repo and
Whoever we
parse?
entrust to like run this CI for the public builds probably should just also have this. I mean, those people can compromise what we're releasing anyhow. So if we don't trust them enough to see this, then like we have much bigger problems. And we're not in a position to engineer our way out of that. Like part of how the CI runs is we have a GitHub account that is org admin on all of the organizations. So whoever is maintaining that deployment is org admin on everything. And that is so that we can use the CI tooling to delegate the rest of everyone else's access. But somewhere it rolls up to like, here's that key. And like if you are maintaining Prow, you have access to that. I don't think it's going to be very effective trying to split that. And even if you did, okay, they can't see the like private embargoed patches, but then you still have this massive hole on like, well, they're going to modify them once they release the main repo or something like that. So I think we could probably just have whoever we get to start maintaining the CI deployments, agree to embargoes and stuff as part of being someone who's running the CI. I think that if we can find people to help work on these things, I don't know that we need to like create a role for it or something. That's the part that feels a little bit strange. Like we have charters that delegate responsibilities for these things. So like, running the infrastructure is like supposed to be Kate Timbra, or running the CI is supposed to be that. And if they're like working on something, then I mean they're a participant in the SIG, right? I think that we should avoid overly siloing and saying like this person is SIG release. People should be thinking about these problem spaces SIG release, but these people participate across them. So that I think that's the part that it felt to me like Antonio was commenting about. So I'll let him speak now. That feels a little off.
What I was to say is that what I don't like is the officialize the position. I mean, if the security committee then decides to organize themselves and dedicate 3 of the members to infra or 2 or 1, I don't think nobody's going to argue. But if we start to write down this kind of compartmentalizations, we are going to end then with somebody to do whatever, somebody to do other thing, and we are adding bureaucracy. So what I'm saying is, you need more people. I don't know if there are something, but let's open to more people. If those 2 people inside the committee is self-organizing to dedicate more time to infra, I personally don't think that's a problem, right? But what I see the risk is we start to writing down all these things, and now everybody has a position, and it's kind of adding bureaucracy that I don't think that, honestly, it always better, right? What happens if one of these people go out and then it's awkward. It's just, you open a position just for one people of influence in security.
Yeah, so yeah, so I would say I don't think the intention is to necessarily add additional bureaucracy. I think it's to ensure that there are named people who can be responsible for that function, which I would agree with that. I think as part of the the model for SRC to consider, like since as Ben was mentioning, at some point things roll all the way up to someone has the key or some group of individuals have some key or some capability, is also like within your threat model is the GitHub administration subproject for SIG contributor experience, right? Because they have access to the entirety of the orgs, right? So just throwing that out, it's and again, I think these are people that the community puts a deep amount of trust, in. So I'm not super concerned about having them read in certain places. I think there is an expectation that each of these groups, some of the groups that are being mentioned, test, Kate's infra, release, that each of us have our own process for designating people with a with some large modicum of trust, right? And maybe this is like in the general case, is a conversation of like, do we agree about how that's done across the board? Because if we can agree about how it's done across the board, then we can say that someone who has worked into a position of trust for foobarb as SIG can be expected to serve in this capacity. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that like if we have a group of people that are read into like operate CI, I like I would kind of push back a little bit as like SIG testing and Kate's infra and say those people should just help with the group that runs CI. I don't really want to create this like separate has access to like the SRC CI but not the other. Like that's how we got into the problem before. I think that we need to just have these people run the CI, they're trusted. If SRC can have some people come help with that and somehow designate that, that makes sense. If I think one thing that might be different though is if we have people that are working on building features and we want to like specially give them read access or something, because even maybe they haven't joined the group to like operate the CI, but they're like working on the private tooling and we want to do that, then like that could make sense to say, well, SRC is like going to designate these people can have like read access to everything that's going on so they can debug iterating on the functionality we need, like the private Prow hosting or whatever. That seems really specific though, and the rest of this is just like we need people that can. We have like two categories. We need people that can run things, and we have to have some trust. And I'm saying like we have that, and we need people that will work on the functionality gaps that allow us to run a private CI. That we don't have. I don't know that it makes a lot of sense to call that a designated role though. Like to me, those are just contributors and they should contribute to where we need work. I share Antonio's concern around like kind of boxing people into that. I don't think that's a good I don't want the project thinking like that.
So just to do a time check, we've got 4 minutes left. I know it's a thrilling discussion, and I'm glad that we didn't put too many things on the agenda because it was going to be such a thrilling discussion. But we are at 4 minutes. So Maciej?
A quick comment. What I would like to see, and maybe that's about what Rita is asking, is that the people who will be designated from Kate's infra or SIG testing, that they are, because most often than not, the embargoed fixes, they're not that frequent, and it's about those people prioritizing the work on the fixes where it's required over everything else for the time of actually delivering the fix. Maybe that could help.
Yeah. Rita, you've got your hand.
Yeah, I really appreciate um, the discussion, and I think for what it's worth, this is really great. I'm just thinking about next steps here in terms of obviously, like Ben said, short term, maybe people will go in and out because they're trying to get things set up. I think I'm less actually concerned about that. I'm more concerned about long term. How concretely, how many people do we need to add to that private repo for Kate's infra on call to work effectively? Just so that we can kind of get an idea.
So we have a
Just
small group
oh,
that's
no,
like the
sorry,
SIG
Melissa. Yeah. Sorry.
that's like the SIG Kate's infra leads, but really we need to iterate on that when we get some more people that will be owning the like Prow code that are active, which is like this is like one of my main threads right now. I would like to kind of rotate that a bit and say, okay, yes, the Kate's infra leads technically have access to all the infrastructure, but for the most part, we're not actually, you know, we're not like abusing that or whatever. We would be using that to delegate to, okay, here's the group that's running CI. And that's going to be also the people that own the code, right? Like the Prow code, which is your other vector. I want to find a subset of people that are willing to approve Prow that we can trust for that, that will also engage with operating our deployment. Right now, we have one or two people that don't have time for that. Like we have someone from Red Hat who operates their deployment and OpenShift and like doesn't have the bandwidth for ours, but I'm like seeking owners. This is a huge problem. By the way, we don't have enough active owners for like the CI code and we can't get anything fixed, let alone reviewing this additional functionality. But when we pull out of that, I think we'll have a pretty good idea of like these are the people who are approving Prow. This is the subset of them who will you know, accept responsibility for the Kubernetes deployment, and then we'll like make sure they have access to any of that infrastructure. I think that that group, when we pull that together, is like who you would probably want to also just like read into the the SRC thing. I would expect to be a very small number of people. I mean, because they're already like I said, they're going to have to be extremely trusted to begin with, because we will be both directly and indirectly giving them the keys to all of the like CI for everything else. Right now, we're falling back on the SIG-K-TS infra leads, but like I don't think that's really meant to be like that was just transitionary out of the like Google on-call. We're not treating it as an on-call right now because that just isn't sustainable for us at the moment. I think though, like we know that we have to find some new trusted proud owners, and some of them need to operate it. Right now though, that it is the K-TS infra leads that are like keeping it running. That's not a permanent place though. So I think we should discuss that. We should figure that out, because we're so understaffed on that like if we can find staffing, we really need to enlist them on like the general CI.
So I want to
Right,
give, yeah, so I was going to say
maybe
we're
one
at,
last thing.
yeah, I
One
was going to say we're at time, but I want to give closing comments to SRC. So Rita, Joel, if you have anything in closing.
Yeah, again, thank you for the discussion. We'll bring all this back to SRC so we can continue the updating the proposal with a few different options. One thing I would like to ask Ben is, again, thank you for like adding Kate's infra to this proposal. Can I ask you to maybe sync with other Kate's infra leads to make sure that this is something they want to take on, and make sure that talk about next steps and how the SRCs and Kate's infra folks can work together.
We should either file an issue in Kate's.io or like take it as an agenda item for the next meeting, though that might be a lot slower given the time of year. I think maybe an issue in Kate's.io, because usually we're looking for people to file like this are the requirements that we have to operate at something, and then discuss what's effective there. I think that's probably the best path, is to start there, and then we should start a separate thread but related about the, hey, who's actually going to own the CI deployment long term? And by the way, we're also discussing having like a private one, and we need to factor that in. I mean, right now the main CI deployment's not even getting patches. It hasn't been updated since we moved it to the community, because there is like one of the leads who is hacking on this intermittently. We obviously have to exit that, but I don't think we have a formal thread. Let me start one for that. Can you start one outlining like what sort of testing gaps you're trying to close, and the like requirements on who has access and that sort of thing in Kubernetes/Kates.io, where we track the
I
infra?
can get that started. Yep.
And I'll ping you when I have a thread about the CI operators.
Cool. All right, folks, this was awesome. Thanks for coming to the discussion, SRC. We will catch you the next one.
Right, thank you. Bye.